out our series. I invite you to take a look at your pink insert if you'd like, or be sure to take it home today, because on the inside, as we've been saying now for several weeks, there's a nice daily devotional where you can dig into these scriptures that I'll mostly just kind of lightly touch on today and have a deeper dive into what Scripture says about these really important topics, which are common fears for all of us, especially as we get older. You know, I don't think when we were in our 20s we worried too much about these things, but now when we're older, we see people around us. We've experienced this through maybe our parents or grandparents, and so these are powerful forces in our lives. Sickness is largely avoided by many people who take care of themselves and live long, healthy lives, and I pray that that's true for all of you. While others, though, we know, suffer for years with chronic illness or maybe the after effects of a stroke or something else. We're going to start in a kind of an unusual place today to get some handles on this, the book of Proverbs. We don't often talk about that much, but there's a wonderful verse that we're going to kick off with, and it's in chapter 19. We hear the words, you see them in that nice big image on the right. The fear of the Lord leads to life. Then one rests content, untouched by trouble. The fear of the Lord leads to life. Now, this is a different kind of fear than we've been talking about for several weeks now. We've been unpacking, these various fears, fear of the other, fear of one thing or another. But fear of the Lord is something we don't talk about much anymore. Maybe when you were little kids, you heard more about it. But in our day and age, we sort of take, if you think of God as a lion, we make him into a pussycat, everybody's friend. Well, that's not the biblical view, especially the Old Testament view of the Lord. There was not sheer terror when one experienced the Lord, but there was certainly awe and respect and reverence. Biblical characters like Abraham and Moses, when you look at their first encounter with the Lord and subsequent ones, there is definitely awe and respect and reverence. They fall on their knees and worship him. The prophet Isaiah has a vision in the temple that inspired that old hymn, Holy, 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 that many of you remember singing a lot when you were kids. I think at the church I grew up, we sang that every Sunday. Where'd that rule come from? But we sure learned about it. As I said, though, many times, I always thought we were singing about our organist, whose name was Ole Sanderson. So every week we sang, Ole, Ole, Ole. And he loved it. He loved it. But Isaiah has this vision of God on in the temple with his robe filling the entire temple, and he cries out, you know this story maybe from chapter 6, Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live amidst a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. He has the fear of the Lord put in him. Or the disciples in the boat in the middle of a storm on the Sea of Galilee watch Jesus calm the wind and the waves with a simple word, peace be still. And the story ends with words of awe and reverence, the fear of the Lord, as they say, Who then is this, that the wind and the sea obey him? Or for those of you who grew up Lutheran and had to memorize a small catechism, You may recall when you had to learn the 10 Commandments and those little explanations, at the end of them, every one of them began with the same words. We are to fear and love God, so that. And really the first commandment's explanation sums up all 10, as Luther wrote, we are to fear, love, and trust God above anything else. And so I think if you have a healthy fear of the Lord, meaning not terror, but awe and respect and reverence, then you need not fear sickness and aging and even death. And I have seen this over and over in mature Christians who have read their Bible for decades, who have come to worship more times than they can ever count, who have received Holy Communion, as you will this morning, hundreds of times. And something happens to your inner soul when you do this repetitive thing over and over, hundreds and thousands of times. You begin to not fear death so much because you have this fear of the Lord, meaning this awe and reverence of what He has done. And that's what we're going to really unpack today. Let's start with the fear of sickness. A few weeks ago, we talked about your brain, and it has this little thing in it about the size of an almond called the amygdala that is a sort of a check engine light in your brain. It's your fight and flight trigger. And most of us aren't like Kermit the Frog here on the screen. When our check engine light goes on, we call up, the garage, and we get an appointment, and we take it in. And they do their checks with their sensors, and they figure out what was the matter. Well, your brain has this amygdala, which is like your check engine light, okay? And it signals you when something's wrong in your body. Maybe you have a sudden pain in your chest. Maybe you, as you are reading the newspaper or a book, you realize, I just can't see the words as easy as I used to. Or you're driving the car down the road at night and it's hard to see the lights. They're a little blurry compared to how they used to be. Well, if we listen to the check engine light in our brain, the good news is really most of the time, if we take the trouble to take our body into the shop, so to speak, to the garage, and let the doctor look us over, these things can be diagnosed and treated, even cured. And aren't we lucky to live where we live in such a time as this? If they can't fix you downtown at one of the two hospitals, it's just a 45-minute drive down to Iowa City or a little longer drive up to Rochester to the Mayo Clinic. But those people deal with this stuff all the time, and they can generally figure out what's wrong and get us on the right path again. Or for those who struggle with worrying about illness, there are mindfulness exercises. You see one of them on the screen there, where you just sort of slow down and you take deep breaths. And it's amazing how in just a few repetitive times of that, you can sort of feel your heart rate calming down, and you can get better. Beyond that, getting physical exercise does wonders for our times of worry as we get out into nature, go for a walk, go out to a park, whatever it is. It's interesting that Jesus had the word about worry from Matthew 6 to not get sucked into that. And right before that, he talks about nature, and he says, remember this? Look at the birds of the air, or look at the lilies of the field, how they spin. They neither toil nor grow, yet Solomon in all his glory is not arrayed as one of these. We get out into nature, and something happens to our worrying. It seems to go away. Well, if sickness doesn't bring fear into your life, growing older has a way of doing that. Look over these various cards here. Pick out the one that you kind of like. Isn't it interesting when we turn a decade, when we get that round-numbered birthday, 20, 30, 40, whatever it is, that's different, isn't it, than the previous one or the next one. I love some of these up on there. 40 is the new 20. At 60, your broad mind and narrow waist have traded places. Isn't that the truth? And sometimes we think that, if we could just be 20 again. We had everything going for us back then. But if you look at this Nielsen survey that we're going to call up next, which is of 300,000 people of all ages, which were asked to report their state of well-being, it's very interesting what you see. Notice how the lines for both men and women start to go down in their 20s. Their sense of well-being drops as they get married, as children are born, as they raise these children, as people start new careers. And then the kids head off to elementary school, but the lines are still dropping. And they get into middle school and high school, and then even college, and the lines are still dropping. But the lines keep dropping until the kids leave home. You notice that? Look when they start to uptick, right? All of a sudden the lines start to climb, and they just keep climbing all the way to 7. Look at who are the high end. It's a lot of you people. Yeah, it's people in their 70s and 80s. They're reporting the highest sense of well-being. Like the old hymn puts it, it is well with my soul. I am done raising kids. The kids have moved out. I'm a grandparent. I can have them in little doses, but then I turn them back to mom and dad. I don't have to provide for their daily needs and so on. It's good. It's good to get older, according to the Nielsen survey. And some of the great names of the Old Testament did their best work when they were retirement age. We sometimes forget this. Abraham was 75 and his wife, Sarah, 65. She'd just gone on Medicare. When the Lord comes to them and says, I want you to move from your kind of very comfortable life. And then it took 25 years for that promise to come true of a boy to be born or a child to be born that they called Isaac. Moses was 80. Had his legs up on the recliner out in the wilderness, and he saw a bush burning and not burning up, and heard a voice say to him out of the bush, I am who I am. Go down to Egypt. Go down, Moses, to old Pharaoh and tell him at the old spiritual put it, let my people go. 80 years old, he gets called to do that work. Joshua is 80 when he leads the nation, the same nation of Israel, into the promised land through the waters of the Jordan, and they battle and take over cities like Jericho and others. Elijah the prophet is a senior citizen when the Lord calls him to take on the prophets of Baal and do his mightiest work. He's looked upon as the greatest prophet of all. And then the Apostle John, exiled on an island called Patmos near the country of Crete and Cyprus, wrote the last book of the Bible, Revelation, in his last years, when he should have been just kicking back and saying, well, that was quite a life I've lived. Winston Churchill could have done the very same thing, rested after World War II. If anybody deserved a break, it was him. But rather than rest, he took up a pen and won the Nobel Prize for Literature at the age of 79. And of course, there's Jimmy Carter. Still going. Teaches Sunday school every day, or every Sunday, except, I guess, today, because he broke his hip this week, and he has to get a sub. But he has taught Sunday school, and more than that, we all know that he has been a marvelous volunteer for Habitat for Humanity for really decades, ever since he lost the election. I think I read in the paper he was only 56 when he lost that election to Ronald Reagan, but he has made a wonderful career out of post-White House life. And as many of you know, retirement offers you new opportunities to volunteer, to serve, to travel, to explore new hobbies, to take courses at a local place like Kirkwood or Elder Hostel. The opportunities are endless. And then there is that one looming enemy that most people fear, and it is, of course, death. It is so final. But let's return to that little proverb where we started today. The fear of the Lord leads to life. The fear of the Lord is awe and reverence for what the Lord does with death. That's the Lord's specialty. Taken on death in a 15-round prize fight, and he knocks death out every time. And when we look closely at what the Lord has done with death in the Bible, we say with those disciples in the boat, who then is this? Who is this one who lifts up the lowly and raises the dead? I think the more you learn about death in the Bible, the less you will fear it. The story of the raising of Lazarus is the classic one, other than Easter, of course. It's a young man named Lazarus, brother of Mary and Martha, who has suddenly died, and they send word to Jesus. He's not dead yet when they send word, but Jesus, for some strange reason, takes his sweet time and doesn't go like an ambulance back to Bethany to save the day. No, he just lets Lazarus die, it seems like. And when he finally gets there, Martha speaks for thousands of other men and women when she cries out, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And those words have echoed down through the centuries to the present day in slightly different forms, perhaps. If you had done your part, God, my husband would have survived that surgery. We prayed and prayed for hours on end. We had every prayer chain we knew of praying, and yet he died. If you had done your part, Lord, my baby would have lived. If you had answered my prayer, God, my arms would not be empty now and my heart would not be broken. The grave reveals a lot about our view of God. And when death knocks on our door, as it always does, our faith is challenged. And when our prayers for healing in this life, anyway, aren't answered, we sometimes get angry and resentful, and blame replaces belief. But we need to remember the words and claim in faith the words Jesus spoke to Mary and Martha. I think this is the greatest I am of all of them. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will die even though they live, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And those words came true a few moments later when Jesus came to the tomb, as the great Rembrandt portrayed it in this photo or this painting on the screen. He ordered the stone be removed, even though Lazarus had been dead, I think, 4 days is the quote in the scriptures. And he called out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And up from the grave he arose. Lazarus arose, as Rembrandt portrays it there on the screen, as would Jesus a short time later on Easter, as he was in his grave and the stone was mysteriously rolled away. And up from the grave he arose as our resurrected Lord. What will you do with that scripture on the right in your life? I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. When I was in campus ministry as a student at UNI, we sang a song based on that. I am the resurrection and the life. It was great. Played fast on our guitars. I could sing it at the Lutheran Center, but it was a whole different matter when it was my dad that was dying of emphysema. And I've told this story before, and I promise this will be the last time I tell it. But on a cold December day in 1978, when I was just 23 years old, we went out to the cemetery a few blocks from our house, and I stood next to the grave of my dad and was the last one to leave. It was cold, like death is. And I put my hand on his casket, and I touched it, and I said those words, I am the resurrection and the life. And I said, I will see you again, Dad. And I will. And I will see my mom, too. We were there about 15 years later, same cemetery, only it was July, a lot warmer. Because, as St. Paul put it, death has been swallowed up in the victory of Jesus Christ. And one of the images of heaven that I love, I've been to a lot of wedding banquets in my day, and they're always a time of great celebration. The food is the best. The wine and the beer flow freely. And the prophet Isaiah has an image of a wedding banquet when he tries to describe what heaven is like. And he goes on to say, and he will destroy on this mountain, meaning Mount Zion, or Jerusalem, okay? He will destroy on this mountain called Jerusalem the shroud that is cast over all peoples, the sheet that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. Where did Paul get his words about death being swallowed up? Right here. And what happened on Mount Zion? That happened on Mount Zion. The cross, Jesus dying on the cross for you and me that we might be forgiven, and then the mighty act of the resurrection. That's what happened on Mount Zion, and that is why the sheet that is spread over all nations, the shroud over all peoples, has been destroyed, and death has been swallowed up forever. As you trust in these kinds of passages in your life, and more importantly, as you fear the Lord, as you trust in the Lord who has done great things for us, may you live with courage and hope for the rest of your days. And when that day comes for you, as it will for every single one of us, when you have one foot in this world and one foot in the next, may you pray or maybe even sing the song we will now sing, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. Amen. Let's stand and sing that great old hymn of faith.